Goldie was a middle-aged woman when she suffered a massive heart attack, which landed her in the hospital. While she was on the operating table, she had a near-death experience. In that moment, she saw God. In that moment, she looked up at God and said, "God, is my time up?" God looked down at Goldie and said, "No, Goldie, you have 40 years, 8 months, and 6 days left on your clock." Upon recovery, Goldie was so grateful that she thought to herself, "I want to make my life full. I want to live my life as full as it can possibly be, and while I'm at it, I want to look great." And so, while she was still in the hospital, Goldie decided to stay a couple more days and get a tummy tuck, a little liposuction, a facelift. She looked like $1 million. She looked like a completely different person. And before she left the hospital, she decided to get her hair done, and get her makeup done. And as she was leaving the hospital after her procedures, she was walking across the street and bam, she gets hit by a truck and dies on the spot. She's infuriated. She looks up at God and says, "God, I thought you said I had 40 years plus left. What happened? Why couldn't you have pulled me from the truck or had the truck sway around me? What happened?" God said, "Goldie, I didn't recognize you." In a comical way, this joke reminds us of one of the main goals of this season, and that is that we are to do away with the ugly parts of ourselves. And the spiritual techniques that we use to motivate us to erase this ugliness is to remind ourselves that we are mortal. Yom Kippur and the intense days of awe which surround it puts us face to face with death in order to give us perspective on life. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, Ernest Becker shook the fields of psychology and anthropology in his day. His premise was that human civilization is ultimately an elaborate symbolic defense mechanism against the knowledge of our own mortality. In other words, the human fear of death shapes who we are, what we believe, and how we ultimately interact with each other in this world. The book, The Denial of Death, essentially makes two powerful points. The first is something that Becker called death terror. He argued that human beings are unique among the animals of the world and that we can think about ourselves in abstract terms. We can imagine ourselves in hypothetical situations. We can contemplate the past, the present, and the future. And we can conceive of realities and situations which may be different from what we're experiencing in the moment. And because of this unique mental ability, Becker says that all of us, at some point in our journey through life, become acutely aware of our death. And this, according to Becker, is absolutely terrifying and underlies everything that we think and do. Becker's second point is that he suggests that since we are aware of our finite existence, and since we are afraid of the inevitable destiny called death, we compensate, either consciously or unconsciously, by trying to live beyond the grave. He argues that everything that is considered a human endeavor is driven by this impulse. The cities, the governments, the structures that surround us, the religious ideas and the political philosophies that ground us, the motives and desires that drive us, all in some way are rooted in the fear of death. Religion, politics, sports, art, technological innovation, each of this is driven by a desire to overcome our physical mortality with something that is lasting. In short, Ernest Becker makes the claim that all meaning in life is shaped by an innate human desire to never truly die. While none of us would fully embrace Becker's philosophy, each of us can certainly recognize the powerful existential ideas embedded in the fact that an awareness of death can help us live our lives more fully, with more meaning and more purpose. In fact, as we gather here on this most holy and awesome night, the images and metaphors of this season serve to remind us that while our time on earth may indeed be limited, the choices we make throughout this journey can have lasting impact. A story is told of a famous rabbi of the last century known by the name Chofetz Chaim. As the story goes, a group of American tourists journeyed to the Rebbe's town of Radun. There, in this tiny little town, in a tiny little office, sitting at a small rickety desk, surrounded by bookshelves with just a few books on it, the tourists that came from America came to visit the Rebbe. And they looked around and they were surprised. This famous rabbi has so little. And one of the tourists had the chutzpah to say, "Rabbi, where's your stuff?" And the rabbi said, "Where's your stuff?" And he said, "Well, we're just passing through." And the rabbi said, "Me too." Tonight we are here in part to remind ourselves that we are just passing through. As it says in one of the best-known prayers of this season, our existence is fleeting. Our lives are like the wind that blows, like a flower that fades, as a passing breeze. Indeed, through readings like this, the daily whisper of our mortality comes to a crescendo during these days of awe. The powerful poetry of such prayers can be at times a little bit uncomfortable to recite. But as they serve to put us face to face with our shared destiny, they challenge us to embrace life with a renewed sense of purpose and meaning. In many ways, the Day of Atonement forces us to humbly recognize that each of us enters and leaves this world in the same way. We bring nothing with us. We carry nothing away. All of us are equal in death. And as we confront this eternal universal truth, we are compelled to consider not what we have, but what it is that we hope to leave behind. It is here that the concept of leaving behind some kind of legacy that we can best relate to the teachings of Ernest Becker. Each of us holds in our heart the hope that when our time on earth is complete, we will be remembered. That whatever impact we have made throughout our lives will have lasting value to those who knew us. And so, as we strive to consider ways to address that natural human longing to leave something of value behind, these high holy days challenge us to become accountable for the following question: what are we going to do with what we've been given? In Psalm 72, King Solomon provides us a model of how we might begin to respond to this question. In the Psalm, King Solomon prays for more influence and more power. And as you read through Psalm 72, in this prayer from King Solomon, it seems at first glance to be so self-centered and egotistical. As Solomon prays out to God, God, grant me power and influence over all the peoples of the earth. Let the king rule from sea to sea, from river to river. Let the desert dwellers kneel before him and the enemies lick the dust. Let all kings bow down to him and the nations serve him. And as you read through this prayer, you cannot help but think to yourself, this is so self-serving, until you read the entire Psalm 72. And you realize that Solomon's prayer is beautiful. Solomon says, grant me all this power and influence, O God, so that I can care for the widow and the orphan, feed the hungry, care for the sick, serve the needy, defend the defenseless, redeem the oppressed. Basically, Solomon is trying to find ways to maximize his influence and power, not for himself, not for his own glory, not for a sense of consolidated personal power, but rather to make a difference in the world. Through this prayer, King Solomon models something that we should all take to heart on this eve of Yom Kippur. And that is that our prayers and our fasting should serve to help us direct our skills and our influences toward the betterment of the world around us. When we take to heart the reality that our time on earth is limited, we might begin to recognize that it's not about us, nor is it about what we have, for we are only passing through. Therefore, our sense of purpose is primarily defined by what we are willing to do with what we have been given. Kol Nidre, our Day of Atonement, draws our attention to the fact that all we've really been given is life. This 24-hour period of intense contemplation and reflection offers us an opportunity to consider what to do with this life in the short span of time we have to live it. As we listen to the haunting strains of Kol Nidre, let us take the time to consider all the ways that we can live our lives to promote a lasting legacy of goodness, kindness, and peace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.